50 years ago today that the USS Thresher, a nuclear-powered attack submarine, sank and broke apart during a test dive off Cape Cod.
In 1963, the USS Thresher, the pride of the US Navy's nuclear submarine fleet, vanished beneath the Atlantic with 129 souls aboard. For decades, its fate remained one of the most chilling mysteries in naval history.
Here on April 10, 1963, the nuclear-powered submarine Thresher took her fatal last trial dive that brought death to her crew of 129.
Was it mechanical failure, human error, or something more sinister? Now, after years of secrecy, new evidence has finally surfaced, and what it reveals is far darker than anyone imagined. The truth behind the Thresher's final moments not only exposes a deadly flaw in Cold War technology, but also a cover-up that cost lives and changed submarine safety forever. Join us in this video as we reveal the truth that took 50 years to surface. By 2013, Bruce Rule, a veteran Navy acoustic analyst, had reached a shocking conclusion. The official story behind the USS Thresher disaster wasn't just wrong, it was dangerously misleading. For 50 years, families of the 129 men who perished in the Atlantic were told one version of events. But Rule believed the real truth had been buried beneath layers of official silence. On April 8, 2013, exactly 50 years after the Navy's Court of Inquiry began investigating the tragedy, Rule decided to speak out. His bombshell findings, published in Navy Times, sent ripples through the military community. Using classified SOSUS acoustic data, information unavailable during the original investigation, he managed to reconstruct the submarine's final moments with chilling precision. The underwater microphones told a story the Navy had never revealed. According to Rule, at 8:45 a.m. on April 10, 1963, the Thresher's main coolant pumps were running normally as the submarine glided through the depths at about 1,000 feet. These pumps were crucial. They kept the nuclear reactor cool and stable. But at 9:09 a.m., just as the sub neared its test depth of 1,300 feet, something went terribly wrong. Rule detected strange, erratic noises, an acoustic pattern unlike anything he'd ever heard before. For 2 long minutes, the electrical system that powered the coolant pumps wavered and faltered. Then, at exactly 9:11, the system failed completely. The pumps shut down and the reactor automatically scrammed, shutting off to prevent overheating. In that instant, the Thresher was dead in the water. Its engines silenced, its power gone, the submarine began to sink uncontrollably. What Rule found next was even more disturbing. The SOSUS network had picked up no signs of flooding. No explosions, no rush of water tearing through the hull. If seawater had been flooding in, the underwater microphones would have recorded the chaos. But they didn't. This meant the Navy's long-standing claim that a burst pipe caused massive flooding was wrong. At 9:17, the Thresher sent her final haunting transmission. The message contained just one cryptic word: 900. Rule believed it referred to the submarine's depth, 900 feet below her test limit. That meant the Thresher was at 2,200 feet and falling fast toward her predicted collapse, depth of 2,400 feet. 1 minute later, at 9:18, the unthinkable happened. SOSUS recorded the distinct, horrifying sound of the Thresher's hull imploding under the crushing weight of the ocean. Rule recognized it instantly. He had heard the sound of death under pressure before, but never one this powerful, this absolute. His conclusion was devastating. The Navy had been wrong for half a century. The Thresher didn't sink because of flooding. It sank because of a catastrophic electrical failure that left it powerless and helpless in the deep. And for 50 long years, that truth had been hidden beneath the waves. But before the mystery of the USS Thresher was finally solved and revealed, what was the official story told about it? Keep watching to find out. The Hunt Beneath the Waves. The search for the USS Thresher became one of the most grueling and ambitious deep-sea operations in naval history. In the aftermath of the disaster, the Navy refused to rest until they found her. For months, specialized vessels scoured the dark Atlantic depths, guided only by faint acoustic echoes and fragments of debris that stretched across miles of the ocean floor. Using the most advanced sonar and detection technology available at the time, they followed the trail piece by piece, sound by sound, hoping to locate the remains of the submarine that had vanished without a trace. The Navy threw everything it had into the search. Surface ships, submarines, and deep-sea research vessels were deployed, including the Mizar, a ship renowned for its precision sonar systems. It had already proven capable of locating shipwrecks in extreme depths, and now it was tasked with one of the most important missions in US naval history. Finally, in June of 1964, more than a year after Thresher was lost, the long and desperate hunt came to an end. Sonar scans revealed the wreckage lying some 8,400 feet below the surface, deeper than any human could ever reach without specialized equipment. What they found was devastating. The once mighty nuclear submarine had been torn apart into 6 major sections, scattered across an area the size of several football fields. When the bathyscaphe Trieste, a deep-diving research vessel, descended into the crushing depths to photograph the wreck, the images that came back stunned the world. The sheer destructive force of the ocean was unlike anything engineers had imagined. Thresher's hull had been completely obliterated, crushed inward as if it were nothing more than a thin aluminum can. The submarine's sail had collapsed in on itself, and her forward sections were mangled beyond recognition. Debris, twisted metal, cables, and fragments of machinery were strewn across the seabed like the aftermath of an underwater explosion. Yet, amid the devastation, one thing stood out: the reactor compartment. It remained remarkably intact. There were no signs of radiation leaks or contamination, a small mercy considering what could have been an environmental catastrophe. Back on the surface, the Navy's Court of Inquiry began its painstaking investigation. Their mission was simple in theory, but monumental in scope: determine what had destroyed the most advanced submarine ever built and taken 129 men to their deaths. For months, investigators pored over maintenance records, interviewed sailors from sister submarines, and examined every photograph of the wreck. By the end, the court delivered what seemed to be a clear conclusion. According to their report, a saltwater pipe in the engine room had failed, specifically at a joint that used silver brazing instead of a full welded connection. These silver-brazed joints had long been known as potential weak points, vulnerable to stress and high pressure. At Thresher's test depth, one of these joints likely gave way, allowing seawater to burst into the submarine with tremendous force. The flooding, the report claimed, shorted out vital electrical systems, leading to an automatic reactor shutdown. With no power, Thresher lost propulsion and began to sink. The situation worsened when the crew tried to activate the emergency ballast blow system to surface, but the system failed, possibly because moisture inside the high-pressure air lines had frozen, blocking the flow of air needed to expel ballast water. Trapped, powerless, and unable to rise, Thresher fell past her crush depth. In an instant, the immense pressure of the deep Atlantic crushed the submarine and everyone aboard. The Court of Inquiry called it a cascade of failures, a combination of flawed construction, inadequate training, and misplaced faith in new nuclear technology. The findings were damning. Shortcuts taken during construction and reliance on untested methods had cost 129 men their lives. The Navy responded swiftly. A massive safety overhaul known as the SubSafe program was created, enforcing strict quality control and design standards on every nuclear submarine built thereafter. Silver-brazed joints were permanently banned from critical systems. Emergency procedures were rewritten, and training became more rigorous than ever before. For decades, this became the accepted story. the official version of what had doomed the Thresher. It was tragic, yes, but it was also a cautionary tale that reshaped the Navy's approach to safety. Most people accepted it without question, but one man, a quiet Navy acoustic expert who had listened closely to Thresher's final moments from the depths, believed the court had it all wrong. However, even after this was declared the official story, there was evidence that was overlooked, and one man revealed it. Stay tuned to find out the details and how it prompted the truth years later. The man who heard what others ignored. Lieutenant Bruce Rule never set out to become the man who would challenge the Navy's most tragic and enduring mystery. In 1963, he was just a young officer stationed at the Sound Surveillance System Evaluation Center in Norfolk, Virginia. His assignment was highly technical, and few even knew what it truly involved. Rule worked with a top-secret program known as SOS-US, the Sound Surveillance System, a vast network of underwater microphones laid across the ocean floor. It was one of America's most closely guarded secrets during the Cold War, designed to track Soviet submarines silently slipping through the depths. The SOSUS network was unlike anything that had come before. Its hydrophones could detect submarine noises from hundreds, even thousands, of miles away. And on the morning of April 10th, 1963, when the USS Thresher vanished during deep-diving tests east of Cape Cod, the system was listening. One array, codenamed Fox, stretched all the way to the Canadian naval station HMCS Shelburne in Nova Scotia. It recorded everything: the faint hum of engines, the rhythmic pulse of coolant pumps, and the eerie silence that followed. Those sounds were captured on paper charts called LOFARGRAMS, low-frequency analysis and recording graphs. These weren't ordinary charts. Each one displayed sound signatures over time, mapping out the life of a submarine in motion. To the trained ear, each pattern was like a fingerprint, unique, identifiable, and full of clues. Rule approached these charts like a detective approaching a crime scene. With methodical precision, he traced every line, every fluctuation, every anomaly. What he discovered would later contradict nearly every conclusion reached by the Navy's official investigation. The acoustic data showed that Thresher's main coolant pumps were running normally during the descent. Then, at a critical moment, the pattern shifted. The pumps became unstable, stuttering in a way Rule had never seen before, until finally they stopped altogether. Even more striking was what the data didn't show. The charts contained no signs of flooding, no violent bursts of sound, no rush of water breaking through pipes, no explosions from structural failure. For Rule, that absence spoke volumes. Something had gone wrong electrically, not mechanically. When Rule was called to testify before the Naval Court of Inquiry, he believed his data would help the Navy uncover the real cause of the disaster. But the reception he received was far from what he expected. The court was skeptical, even dismissive. SOSUS was still classified at the time, and few in the Navy truly understood its capabilities. The idea that acoustic data could reveal so much about the submarine's fate seemed far-fetched to many senior officers. Investigators were more comfortable relying on radio communications between Thresher and her escort ship, Skylark, and on what little physical evidence could be gathered from the ocean floor. When Rule presented his findings, that the data pointed to electrical failure and not flooding, some members of the court pushed back. A few even urged him to adjust his interpretation so it would align with their theory that flooding caused the loss. To Bruce Rule, it became painfully clear that the court was not truly searching for the truth. It was searching for confirmation. The official narrative had already begun to take shape, and inconvenient evidence had no place in it. Over the decades that followed, that narrative hardened into accepted history. Textbooks, documentaries, and official Navy reports all repeated the same explanation. A silver-brazed pipe joint had failed, flooding the submarine, shorting out the electrical systems and causing a reactor shutdown that left Thresher helpless in the depths. It was a tidy story, one that fit the available facts well enough to satisfy the public. But deep inside the Navy's classified archives, the acoustic data that contradicted this version of events sat quietly, sealed away. Only a handful of specialists even knew it existed. Bruce Rule never forgot what he had seen, or rather, what he had heard. As his career advanced, he became the Navy's lead acoustic analyst, serving for more than 4 decades. Within intelligence circles, he earned a near-mythic reputation for his unmatched ability to interpret submarine sounds. Yet, despite all his accomplishments, one conviction stayed with him. The truth about the Thresher had not been told. And after 50 years of silence, on the anniversary of the disaster, Bruce Rule finally decided it was time to speak. His groundbreaking 2013 analysis of SOS-US data would reveal a very different story of what really happened during the Thresher's final, desperate moments, and expose how the Navy had gotten it wrong all along. So, how did the USS Thresher disappear overnight? Let's find out. The Final Dive: How the USS Thresher Vanished Beneath the Waves. On the morning of April 9th, 1963, the USS Thresher slipped away from the docks of Kittery, Maine at precisely 8 a.m. She was under the command of Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey, a respected officer known for his calm leadership and technical skill. This was no ordinary voyage. It was the submarine's first set of deep diving trials since undergoing extensive maintenance and upgrades at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. At 11 a.m., Thresher rendezvoused with the submarine rescue ship Skylark in the Atlantic, roughly 190 nautical miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The plan was simple: perform a series of post-overhaul tests to ensure the submarine's systems were functioning properly before she rejoined the fleet. That afternoon, the crew conducted an initial trim dive, then surfaced, and later performed a controlled descent to half of her test depth, around 650 feet. Everything seemed routine. Thresher had been to her full test depth nearly 40 times before. There was no reason to believe this time would be any different. That night, Thresher remained submerged, continuing her evaluation. Early the next morning, April the 10th, at 6:30 a.m., she re-established underwater communication with Skylark and began her most critical test, the deep dive trial. Following standard Navy procedure, the submarine descended gradually, moving in slow circles beneath Skylark to maintain communication range. Every 100 feet, the crew paused to check systems, ensuring everything from pressure seals to reactor performance remained stable. For several hours, everything appeared normal. Then, just as the submarine neared her maximum test depth, 1,300 feet, something changed. At around 9:13 a.m., Skylark received a distorted message over the underwater telephone. The voice on the other end was garbled, but a few words came through. Experiencing minor difficulties. Have positive up angle attempting to blow. It was standard Navy lingo, meaning the crew was trying to surface using the ballast system. But something about the tone, the broken signal, suggested more than minor difficulties. Moments later, another message came through, barely audible and fragmented, but one number stood out clearly: 900. It would later become one of the most haunting details of the tragedy. Then, silence. Skylark tried repeatedly to raise Thresher, but there was no response. Minutes turned into hours, and the tension aboard the rescue ship grew unbearable. The ocean was calm, the skies were clear, but beneath the surface, something had gone terribly wrong. By mid-afternoon, the US Navy launched one of the largest search efforts in its history. 15 ships raced toward the last known location of Thresher, their sonar systems scanning the depths for any trace of the missing submarine. But the Atlantic offered nothing back, only an empty, echoing silence. At 6:30 that evening, the grim reality began to set in. The commander of Submarine Force Atlantic ordered Portsmouth Naval Shipyard to begin notifying the families of the crew. The first call went to Commander Harvey's wife, Irene. She was told what no Navy family ever wants to hear. Thresher was missing. Hours later, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral George W. Anderson Jr. stepped before reporters at the Pentagon. With visible gravity, he announced that the USS Thresher had been lost with all 129 souls aboard. It was the darkest day in the history of the U.S. submarine service. President John F. Kennedy immediately ordered all flags across the nation to be flown at half-mast from April 12th through the 15th in honor of the lost submariners and shipyard personnel. Across the country, hearts broke for the men who had vanished in the deep, brave sailors who had trusted in their vessel, only to meet their end in the unforgiving silence of the Atlantic. No one could yet explain what had happened beneath those waves. But as the days turned to weeks, one thing became clear. The Thresher disaster was not just a tragedy, it was a mystery that would haunt the Navy for generations. What legacy did the USS Thresher leave behind, and how did it change things for the future? Keep watching to find out. The legacy of loss that transformed naval safety forever. When the Court of Inquiry finally released its report on the USS Thresher disaster, it did more than assign blame. It transformed the future of submarine safety forever. The report recommended that the Navy adopt a far stricter program for design review, testing, and inspection during submarine construction. That initiative, launched in December 1963, became known as SubSafe, a name that would soon carry enormous weight within the naval community. From 1915 until 1963, the US Navy had lost 16 submarines in non-combat accidents. But since the introduction of SubSafe, only one submarine has been lost, the USS Scorpion in 1968, and crucially, it was not SubSafe certified. This new program ensured that no submarine could dive unless every safety system, weld, valve, and joint met the strictest standards. It was the Navy's solemn vow that a tragedy like Thresher would never happen again. In the years that followed, memorials began to appear across the country, each one honoring the 129 souls who went down with the Thresher. So, what do you think of the truth being revealed after so long? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video shown on your screen to catch up on your favorite celebrity stories. See you there.